It was the sour tang of gochugaru in the air, clinging floral and burning to my skin, that stayed with me long after the night of my collapse. Some people might recall the scrape of a chair dragged across a school recital stage, the silent judgment that ripples through parents' faces, but I remember the spice and heat of Korean red pepper powder, how the measured spoonfuls had comforted me all my life, and how, standing there in my cheap black dress shoes on my final day of high school, it felt suddenly foreign. The music room that day vibrated with sterile apprehension, students rehearsing musical scales behind glass walls, mothers quietly berating their children's posture, my father tight in a grey suit next to the ancient piano, a frown engraved under his brow. Each year, the seniors took to the small raised platform in front of our teachers, playing whatever instrument had been thrust upon us in youth. We recited, performed, bowed, cementing our family honour and right to safe careers. Except I didn't belong up there, everyone knew it. My fingers fumbled along the keys of the Yamaha upright, notes bleeding together in my nervousness. The melody was a popular folk tune, easy to the point of embarrassment, but my pulse battered in my ears. The room shrank around me, the jury of teachers, family, the community members who sponsored our school. I glanced sideways, catching the familiar faces from our street. The Ajamas from my mother's sewing circle, my older cousin Jisoo grinning with pity beside his university friends. My uncle Jinho in the front row, arms folded, whispered just loud enough for the old priest to hear. She should have stayed home, peeled garlic for her mother. My chest pinched, sweat pooled under my hairline. By the fifth measure I was gone. My mind floated out of my body, leaving my hands to scramble, skid and silence themselves on the keys. The teachers in their wooden chairs scribbled notes. At last the jury bell chimed, an abrupt clang. I jerked to a halt, flushed and humiliated, the polite applause a mere tickle. My father's lips pressed into a line so thin it seemed he might cease existing out of sheer disappointment. And my cousins, later huddled over plates of pickled radish and rice cakes, replayed my disaster, complete with dramatic piano bashing and fake tears. I hid behind the kitchen screen as they laughed, and my mother rinsed rice silently, her face set. "Your head's always in a bowl instead of in your books or piano," she said, more to herself than to me. But my refuge was the kitchen, that kingdom of onions and steam and metallic clang where my grandmother held court. She barely registered the clamor of achievement that thundered past every day. She noticed only taste, only effort, only the deep magic of food turned into memory. "Come, Yoonha," she would say when I drifted out of family lectures, "let them do numbers and grades. I need cabbage for kimchi and these old hands are too slow now." Evenings with her were full of stories and spices. When the others watched dramas, we split garlic and whisked gochujang, and sometimes she let me invent a dish, poorly at first but always with encouragement. I never thought anyone else's approval could matter so long as her hands guided mine. After my recital meltdown, even the kitchen felt altered. Whispers orbited the house whenever I dared chop onions or tenderize beef. "You'll never marry a real man, she can't even play piano," an aunt complained. "Girls who smell like kimchi all day end up old maids." The boys in my grade called me Cook Yoonha and made smacking noises when I passed. Any mention of culinary school was met with silence or outright laughter. Through high school, I tried to fit their blueprint. I applied for every university they suggested, scored decently on exams, filled my schedule with English lessons and violin. None of it stayed with me. In class, I'd find myself sketching restaurant kitchens in the margins of my notebooks, recalling how flame curls up around a good piece of pork belly, how the deep scent of sesame oil meant home. By graduation, my grades were mediocre, my acceptance letters thin as napkins. One day, over a dinner where the only cheerful sound came from the snap of bean sprouts, I dared to speak. "I want to be a chef," I said. 5 words out in the open, burning a path between me and my family. The table went silent. My father set down his spoon with precision. "You want to chop onions and scrub pans?" he asked. "You disgrace our family. You embarrass your mother." My uncle Jinho, always first to sneer, let out a laugh. "You'll last 1 week, maybe they'll let you serve soup in the back." My mother's hands curled around her napkin. "Who will respect you? Who will marry you smelling like grease and garlic?" The shame was so sharp I felt hollowed out on the spot, but somewhere past humiliation my courage flared. I remembered my grandmother's old fingers folding mandu, the satisfaction of creating comfort. "It was enough, I won't ask you for anything," I said, "just let me try." They refused to pay for culinary school. My father called it pouring money into a pit. My savings, meager birthday bills pressed into my palm over years, and the odd part-time job barely covered basics. Determined, I found a day job at a grimy noodle shop off Jongno, chopping vegetables and scrubbing the floor for next to nothing. At night, I took classes in a dingy classroom where the only oven broke every other week. I lied to my parents about where I spent late hours. Sometimes, after shifts, I'd ask chefs for leftover bones and vegetables, smuggling them home to practice stock while my family slept. Exhaustion wore through my skin, but shame drives deeper than fatigue. Every time I faltered, I remembered the look on my father's face, the ridicule in my cousin's voice. That hurt, I let it churn inside me until it transmuted into effort. I worked for years, bouncing between kitchens, starting where no one wanted to be, dish pit, then prep, then finally on the line, making sauces, learning temperature by touch rather than by thermometer. Seoul is unkind to outsiders and kitchens even less forgiving. I took the yelling, the burns, the sticky floors, the 3 hours sleep, and I kept moving. There were nights I broke down. After a double shift in the kitchen of Hyjin's barbecue, my fingers cracked and bleeding, I ducked into the alley behind the bins, phone pressed to my ear, and wept. My grandmother's voice soothed me, though age made her slower. Your hands smell of hope, child. Don't let food poison you with regret. She believed, in a quiet, unshakable way none of the others ever did. The rest of my family kept their distance. My uncle's wife once stopped by the market stall where I worked during the Chuseok rush. She pretended not to know me in front of her friends, only buying rice cakes when a manager came over. I carried that day in my chest for too long, but slowly I improved. Mistakes got fewer. I memorized the way jun sizzles when the batter is perfect, how hot oil smells just before it burns. Chefs started greeting me by name. Customers asked for the girls' kimchi pancakes. A sous chef from a new restaurant noticed my diligence and recruited me. We need heart, not just hands, he told me, showing me how to plate with finesse, how to accept praise with humility. One cold January, grandmother fell sick. I spent nights at her bedside, feeding her porridge, tucking her old cardigan around her shoulders. Keep cooking, Yoonha, she whispered. Make food that remembers home. When she passed, I packed her old stone rice bowl and a lock of hair into my bag and promised never to stop. Seoul's culinary scene changed as I grew. Young chefs set out to reinvent basics, draw influencers and international guests. I'd saved enough to apprentice under a renowned chef in Busan for a year, long hours, harsh criticism, but rich with technique and stories. Your palate's sharper than your tongue, Chef Moon told me when I passed his taste tests. Don't ever lose that. By my late 20s, a fusion spot downtown gave me a real shot. The owner handed me the reins to the banchan selection, letting me quietly reimagine the flavors I'd grown up with. We made headlines, influential food bloggers started to drop by, and Michelin inspectors came rumored to dine in secret. I started a social media account sharing photos of the dishes, the stories behind each recipe. The page exploded. Seoul loves a narrative, especially a scrappy one. Before long, English magazines wrote me up as the girl who put comfort back in Korean food. Years of sweat, ridicule, heartache, and peeled onions suddenly seemed to coalesce in a clamor of bookings and invitations. My mother called once to ask about an article someone showed her, but our conversation stopped short of acknowledgement. My father's silence thickened, became an absence more solid than anger. And then, after a decade, I found the courage to return. It was a late autumn evening in Seoul when our restaurant, my restaurant, opened for a special community banquet. A famous food critic was in attendance, and the press huddled by the windows, lenses hungry. I'd spent weeks planning the menu, weaving memories and old recipes into each dish, threading a story between childhood and adulthood. A neighbor I remembered from my grandmother's block had sent out invitations to many, my old school teachers, families of classmates, church elders, even my parents. I didn't expect them to come. But as the first guests flowed in, their voices bounced from the high, minimalist ceilings and across sleek wooden tables. I saw a familiar grey head bob by the entrance. My uncle, then my cousin Jisoo, rounder now, expensive glasses. My mother, hair swept back, clutching her purse as if bracing for a storm. My father, shoulders set, eyes everywhere but on me. I inhaled the nutty aroma of sesame and seaweed, shaking as I gave last-minute instructions to the staff. We plated appetizer after appetizer: smoked mackerel with pickled Asian pear, sweet potato croquette with chili jam, my grandmother's favorite perilla pollen soup reworked with mussels and wild greens. Each course designed to echo memory, loss, longing, the shame and strength of belonging nowhere until I built a home from my own yearning. Between rounds, I watched faces in the crowd. People smiled, murmuring thanks, even laughing with surprise at familiar flavors turned new. My hands trembled when I saw my father chewing slowly, eyes narrowed, not in anger but intent on understanding. For the final course, I came to the room myself. Staff brought out small porcelain bowls. The pattern was the same as my grandmother's, filled with my take on kimchi jjigae. As steam rose and mingled with the chatter, I called everyone's attention. "I want to thank you all for coming tonight," I began, my voice shaking at first, "to those who raised me even when you did not understand me. The flavors tonight come from our grandmothers, our mother's frustration, our winter kitchens, from shame and from hope. I hope you taste love." You could have heard a pin drop. I saw in the delicate steam rising from the bowl my grandmother's hands hovering, guiding, my mother's face impassive but her lips pressed tight, my father looking at his spoon, quiet. My uncle, usually quickest with a joke, staring as if surprised. Someone at the critics' table whispered, "Exquisite." Tension snapped as applause rose, hesitant at first, then swelling from every corner. Even Jisoo stood, clapping hard, a look I'd never seen on his face. Afterward my relatives lingered. My uncle approached, holding a spoon, eyes a little wide. "That stew like my mother's, but not better maybe," he chuckled genuinely. Jisoo snapped a photo of the bowl, promising to show it off at his company. My mother glided up, fixing a stray hair behind my ear. "Your grandmother would have liked it," she said. "Even your father finished his bowl." She hesitated, reaching out to squeeze my hand. My father waited until others had gone outside for rice cakes and persimmons. He wiped his mouth with his napkin, avoiding my gaze, and for a long while said nothing. Finally he released a slow breath and met my eyes. "You worked hard," he said. "You did not shame us. You made, I think, a new tradition." He inclined his head, a bow just deep enough to acknowledge what words could not. In that moment, the years melted, the ridicule, the loneliness, the endless kitchens. I'd returned not just with proof of success but with my own place at the table, carved through shame and courage. Outside, the city blazed with neon and possibility. I joined the guests at the sidewalk, felt the autumn wind drift over our laughter, caught the lingering scent of my grandmother's kitchen in the air. Home at last, rebuilt by the hands they once doubted, seasoned with every struggle I had learned to savor.